Last week, we launched the Meducate Global Academy, which is really allowing us to focus on the growth of health professions educators. And by health professions educators, it's almost agnostic to what profession you're in, because the way we teach doctors and nurses and physical therapists and pharmacists and everybody is basically the same and built on the same tenets. And we're also really trying to focus on how do we improve people's communication skills, presentation skills? How do they use things like improv and adult learning to really focus in on how do we get our messages across? Because quite frankly, not everybody communicates really well.
Hey, this is Jonathan Marx from GoToHealth. I hope you're doing well today. I have a question for you. We know that doctors have a lot of information they share with us, but how do they get this information and how do they learn to share it effectively with you? Good question. This is the role of what is called continuing professional development, or CPD, in the medical profession. Licensed healthcare professionals have to take so many hours of continuing education each year to maintain their licensure. And there are continuing education organizations around the globe who are responsible for updating and training medical professionals, not only with the information, but how to communicate that information. It's my pleasure to speak today with a longtime associate in medical education, Lawrence Sherman. He's a fellow of the Alliance for Continuing Education in the Health Professions, and he's just launched a new medical education company called Meducate. You can learn more at meducateglobal.com. He's training people in medical education not only in the United States, but worldwide. And we'll talk with Lawrence about the importance of his international involvement. We're building a community of people who care about living well, aging better, and showing up for their health every day. If that's you, please tap the 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or give us a thumbs up on YouTube or wherever you listen to us, and help others find this space too. So welcome to the show, Lawrence Sherman. How are you today?
I am doing really well, and I am glad to be talking to you after all this time.
Good. Yeah. So Lawrence and I have known each other for probably close to 20 years, I'm going to guess. And we've both been in medical education and health education. And Lawrence, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. So you've launched a new company called Meducate Global. Tell us what it is, what's the purpose, and why you started it.
Right. So Meducate Global actually has been around since 2019 as sort of an umbrella organization for a lot of the work that I've been doing, building capacity of health professions educators domestically and abroad. Last week, we launched the Meducate Global Academy, which is really allowing us to focus on the growth of health professions educators. And by health professions educators, it's almost agnostic to what profession you're in, because the way we teach doctors and nurses and physical therapists and pharmacists and everybody is basically the same and built on the same tenets. And we're also really trying to focus on how do we improve people's communication skills, presentation skills? How do they use things like improv and adult learning to really focus in on how do we get our messages across? Because quite frankly, not everybody communicates really well.
Yeah. So, I want to thank you for saying that, because I want to get to the basics. How do we know? So, licensed health professionals have to take continuing education every year to maintain their licensure. So, how do we know that this education, this continuing education, how do we know it's effective? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's, as you know, a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to give you a sort of a two-level answer. The one level answer is focusing on the United States and the sort of the Western world. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more globally, and maybe we'll do that a little more later as well. But we know that medical information, healthcare information is doubling and tripling at a rate that we've never seen before. And
Correct.
no matter when you finished your formal training, there's an incredible need to continue that education. And all healthcare professionals commit to lifelong learning. And there's a lot of people and organizations and everybody in between that work to develop good, high quality continuing education based on the needs of these healthcare professionals, both as individuals and as parts of teams. Because we have to remember that in healthcare, our providers work in teams, internal teams, external teams, collaborative teams, things like that. So there's processes in place and accreditation in place to ensure that the process that's followed to develop the continuing education is there. and that there are organizations that are accredited to provide these credits so people can continue to maintain their certifications and licenses and things like that and beyond. The thing that I focus on, Jonathan, is how do we make sure that people that are teaching in these courses know how to teach? In medicine and in healthcare, it's almost expected that as part of your development process, you're going to do some teaching. So senior students teach junior students, trainees teach senior students, et cetera. But quite often, people aren't trained how to teach and communicate with students, communicate with professionals, communicate with patients. So that's sort of the nexus of where I'm living these days. And that's
Mhm.
how we can ensure that high quality is also focusing on those teachers.
Got it. So you mentioned earlier that the volume of medical information that's developing is overwhelming. I mean, you walk into a doctor's office and you'll see piles of books and magazines, which are all the latest information. And the question is, okay, they can read it, but the question is, what do they do with that information? And I think more importantly, which is what you're all about, how do they communicate that information? How do they communicate that information with a patient? And I think the real measure of effectiveness is how does it change the life of a patient? Does the patient listen? Does the patient change his behavior? How can we assure that education is really effective in changing people's behavior and improving health outcomes?
So there's really interesting research around how adults learn because adults don't learn the same way as children. And what really frustrates me is when I hear the term pedagogy, because pedagogy is how we teach children.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we have to do is make sure that what we're teaching these adult professionals is designed for them. Second thing is, I'm so glad you brought up the magazines and the textbooks because by the time things are published, they're often obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, we have to rely on our healthcare professionals to develop their own personal learning networks and to be able to know where to go to find the right information, test it out, apply it, and make the determination of how and whether they will make a change. The other thing that we know is different people learn and change at different rates. We can't assume that you and I are exactly the same. And if we're exposed to the same information and education, we at the exact same rate will make the same change at the same time. Sometimes, like I'm going to make a change 2 seconds after I hear something because that's the way my brain works.
Mm-hmm.
But others may say, well, I want to see that research replicated. I want my colleagues to test it out. I want to hear the experts say it's the right thing to do. I want guidelines to be updated. I want that to happen before I make a change. There's nothing wrong with that either. So we have to embrace the fact that not everybody learns and changes at the same rate. And it's sort of like when you were in school, there was the kid that finished the test first and the kid that finished the test last. The kid that finished the test first wasn't always the smartest kid, and the kid that finished the test last wasn't the least smartest kid.
Yes.
So time is not the measure of success of making a change.
Good. And I want to also talk about another concept, which I know you know well, we both know well, is the whole idea of repetition. Because when people hear information, it's not enough to just hear it once. You have to hear it in a repeated manner and repeat, multiple times to have this information sink in so that you can actually use it. Can you talk about repetition and the importance of that?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of research around that in the health professions education and the general education literature as well. And adults take multiple interventions, let's call them that. Many adults take multiple interventions before they'll make a change in behavior, et cetera. And sometimes having these repetitions, or in education, we call it scaffolding. So we need to give you the baseline information, then we need to build on that and build on that. So the story is told correctly. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just repetition, but it's also how you tell that story and how you build it. And there's lots of these different formats like spaced education where you can do it at multiple intervals. Education doesn't have to be an hour long. Education can be 5 minutes long. And the other thing that's really important is to remember that adults are driven to look for information and education when a question comes up at work in clinical practice. So what I like to say is the point of care has become the point of education. So sometimes people are seeking that information out directly, formally, by searching something, talking to a colleague informally. And all of those things represent those little repetitions. So you have those little bits of information that continue to build on each other and reinforce. So it's incredibly important.
Good. Can we talk a little bit about the provider and patient communication and how that is effective and what patients can do if they feel they're not understanding what their doctor's telling them? How can they get more effective information that'll be helpful for them?
Well, it goes to the heart of something that has a name that I hate, and that name is soft skills. Soft skills is the wrong term for communications and those types of skills that healthcare professionals have to have and excel at on a regular basis. Surgeons, we test them on their ability to do a procedure and trustable professional activities. Medical students, we test them using the OSCE. It's a very structured testing process where we test them on their communication skills, but we don't continue to reinforce that. And so we don't always ensure that our healthcare professionals are the optimal and ideal communicators. And it's
Mm-hmm.
true, not just in healthcare, just around the world. There are people that are great communicators and people that are not so great communicators.
Right.
But communication is a two-way street. And when we teach about this, we teach as much about listening as talking. And healthcare professionals need to commit to the two ear, one mouth rule. Listen twice as much as you talk. That's why you have two ears and one mouth. And patients and caregivers can also think about that. So take in what's going on, process it, and spit it back out. But it is their right to understand exactly what is happening and to question things. And today, even more than when you and I first met, when sort of technology was just emerging as a tool in education and healthcare, people are smarter. There's high quality information that they have access to on a regular basis that they can go in and they're having good, intelligent conversations with their healthcare professionals. I wouldn't take a combative stance with a healthcare professional, but remember, unless you're in an emergent situation, depending where in the world you are, it's true that you can fire your doctor. And if you don't like the answer you're getting or the communication you're getting, have that conversation. Don't go right to firing them, but say, listen, I want to be a part. I want this to be shared decision making. That's a phrase that the patient should embrace. I want to be a part of the decision. I want to understand the process, and I want you to help me understand why it's the right thing to do. Ask the right questions, you get the right answers.
Good. Thank you. Now, Meducate is a global company. That's actually part of your URL? It's meducateglobal.com. If people want to learn more, they can go to meducateglobal.com. That's educate with an M in front of it, meducateglobal.com. Lawrence, why is this a global company? Why do we care in the United States about health communications or healthcare effectiveness in other countries?
Well, I consider myself a global citizen. And I have spent the better part of my career working not only in the United States, but all over the world. And it's because the same needs exist in healthcare professionals and in patients and everybody in between in all of these places. It's not like saying, here's what we do in the US, here's what you need to do in X or Y or Z. Every country has its own context specific needs, et cetera. But there are places around the world where the healthcare professionals and the health professions educators don't have access to the same type of content that our folks in the US do. And in the US, I often say we're spoiled because there's so much available.
Right.
And there's a big part of what I have done over the last few years and what I'm trying to do in building capacity of appropriately trained health professions educators. And a part of the ethos and DNA of the Meducate Global Academy is a giving back model. So for every contract that I sign for doing work, I am donating a training webinar to organizations domestically and internationally that are resource constrained. So charities and other organizations that don't have the ability to pay for this themselves, I want to be able to get it to them. So it's a giving back model. It's sort of like the Bombas model of health professions education. For every pair of socks you buy, we'll donate one. I just like that model. And at this point, Jonathan, it's, we have to make a living, but we should want to make a difference.
Excellent. I love that point. Thank you. Now, as we work with people in other countries, there's got to be a lot of cultural sensitivities. Can we talk about that a little bit? I mean, information and, evidence is evidence, and evidence-based medicine is just evidence. But what kind of sensitivity do we have to account for cultural differences?
So I embrace cultural differences, and I always say it's as much about the context as it is about the content. And what I will say is the majority of people that are teaching and the majority of people that are practicing have the same basic makeup needs and wants. But
Mhm.
how it's taught and how we do it is very specific to the environment in which people operate. I always like to say that there's that saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so you could have the greatest strategy to employ, but if the culture or the environment isn't ready to accept it, it's not going to work. So we don't simply go into places, and by we, I mean the broad enterprise, not just we. But we don't just go in and say, here's the answer to your problem. We go in and say, let's identify where the gaps are. Let's find the root causes and let's help you get to a place where you can improve what you're doing. I'll give you a for instance, if I may.
Please.
In collaboration with AMI, which is the International Association for Health Professions Education, we developed a capacity building program and we trained CPD, continuing professional development educators in 5 sub-Saharan African countries. We developed it as a 6 module online course. When we met with the country leads in each of the 5 countries, they said, this is great, but we have connectivity issues and we have an issue of keeping people and keeping their attention. We need you to turn this into a face-to-face course. So we quickly turned it into a face-to-face course, which is the opposite of what we've seen in other cultures and environments where there's a face-to-face course and people say, we'll get more participants and more completions if we have this as a digital online self-paced course. So that's an example of where context and content have to be really married so that you get the outcomes that you want.
And I think this really relates to how we do medical education and treat patients within the United States. One, we're not one culture. We're multicultural here in the United States. And as you talk about content versus message, I mean, it's content versus context. We have to account for this in the United States as well, depending on who we're dealing with. And we have to know how to communicate with people depending on what their cultural background is.
Oh, 100%. I'll give you an example there too. I got a million of them, Jonathan.
Good.
When I was still a continuing education provider, when I was developing clinical educational activities for practicing clinicians, I worked on an interprofessional, so a team-based educational program in diabetes. And what we had was a series of face-to-face meetings where we had interprofessional faculty. So we had physician, nurse, pharmacist, diabetes educator, all teaching. And I remember one of the diabetes educators saying to me, she said, boy, we develop this great content and we push it out to the practitioners. But until we walk a mile in the shoes of those practitioners, we can't know that what we're telling them is right. And she gave me the example that she went into her community. She was based outside of Chicago. And she said, until she saw how the patients that she was dealing with did not have access to good quality food, good, healthy food, it's easy to say, oh, your lifestyle change will help you with your diabetes. It's impossible within the cultural context in which people were living. So
Mhm.
you're exactly right. Every educational activity and every participant in every educational activity represents a microcosm. And they have to have this education so that it is relevant to themselves and that it's not a one size fits all.
If I can share another example I've heard of, a doctor walked into an office with a face mask on, and his patient, who actually came from Africa, freaked out. And the doctor was saying, what's wrong? And the patient said, where I come from, if a doctor walks in with a mask, it means I have a communicable disease that I could die from. Hey, am I going to die? And the doctor said, no, I'm so sorry you thought that. I just have a cold and I didn't want to pass it on to you. So cultural background is so important in communication to make sure that what we're trying to communicate is effectively communicated.
100% correct.
Good. So, Lawrence, I like to get in this part of the interview, I like to get to the part where I ask, what haven't I asked that I should have?
Well, I think one of the things I'd like to reinforce is that regardless of whether you're a healthcare professional or not, whether you're an educator or not, a lot of the concepts that we try to share in communications and presentations and active listening in all of these contexts are applicable across the board. Anybody that has to have a conversation can have their communication skills honed. Anybody that has to give a presentation, whether it's to 5 people or 5,000 or 50,000, can have their skills honed. And that's sort of the sweet spot of what we're doing. And one of the things that we're trying to do is get some of this stuff out in a way that anybody that wants to improve their communications or presentation skills can do that. And some of the things, I think you know this, I used to be a stand-up comedian. So one of the things that we do, one of our courses is how do you use improv to improve your communication skills?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things that we're doing that are just trying to help people be better at what they do, regardless of the setting that they do. And again, I go back to that. I'm trying to help people be more effective communicators, more effective presenters, more effective educators, and comfortable in their own shoes. Well, one other one that I'm working on is presentation skills for people who are introverted. Because the best presenters I have ever seen, I wound up learning that they're very introverted. And so I've taken from them what it was that they needed to do to be more comfortable in their own shoes. And so we're going to have a whole focus on how do we help those who are more introverted be better presenters and communicators.
That's good. I heard a wonderful story from actually one of my mother's doctors when she was alive. He asked, how do you tell whether your doctor is an introvert or an extrovert? And the answer is, if they're an introvert, when they're talking to you, they look at their shoes. And if they're an extrovert, when they're talking to you, they look at your shoes. So,
You know what's funny? I heard that one, but instead of doctor, it was accountant.
okay.
Yeah, but that's a fun one.
Yeah. So we have to deal with how people, the effectiveness of communication and, regardless of who people are, what their, individual makeup is or what their culture is. Lawrence, the work you're doing worldwide is a blessing. And I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing in creating better communication in the healthcare space.
Thank you. And I really like what you're doing. I like the name of GoToHealth. I just love that. I'm a Brooklyn boy, so my brain one place.
Good.
But I really like what you're doing. And I appreciate the opportunity to share this because I think the common goal here is to improve people's comfort in being a part of their own healthcare, no matter what part of the equation they're in.
Good. Great. Lawrence, it's been a pleasure reuniting with you, even for this brief period, to see what you're doing. We've been talking with Lawrence Sherman. He's a fellow of the Alliance for Continuing Education in the Health Professions, and he's just launched the new medical education company called Meducate. You can learn more at meducateglobal.com. Before we go, just a quick reminder, if you liked what you've heard on this show, please leave us a 5-star review or a thumbs up on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or wherever you're listening to us. It helps keep this content free and reaching people just like you. This has been Jonathan Marx with GoToHealth, and as we say at the end of every show, go to health. Take care. God bless. We'll see you again next time. Bye. Thank you for tuning in today to Go to Health. You are one of almost 10,000 people per day who enjoy the evidence-based health information offered by our guest health experts. You can watch us on our website and YouTube and listen to us on 8 podcast networks. Be sure to join Jonathan Marx in our upcoming shows each week. If you like our show, please share this episode with your friends and colleagues. You can subscribe to the show, join our email list, send us feedback, browse through the online store, and view our library of over 150 shows at GoToHealthMedia.com. See you next time, and remember to elevate your life with Go to Health.